Red Star Radio. Voice of the Revolution.
It's become a truism lately that the left is turning against freedom of speech. Everyone from new atheist YouTubers to rock stars from the far right to left liberals is jumping on the bandwagon, calling out the so-called regressive left. Is this a fair criticism though? Or are they throwing around the term like a buzzword to win arguments? In order to answer that, we should clarify what freedom of speech actually means. Webster's dictionary defines it as the legal right to express oneself. This makes it a negative right, meaning it's a restriction on what the state can do to private citizens. With this in mind, it's hard to see how the concept actually applies to what these anti-left critics are talking about. Of course, language is always evolving and terms take on new meanings all the time. But even so, it's usually very unclear what the proposal is or what the implications are. Here are some of the more common things people mean when they cry free speech. Freedom from consequences. This one's the most similar to the actual legal definition since it does have to do with consequences for speech. The difference is that they're applying it not to state sanctions but to consequences enforced by private individuals or enterprises. For example, getting someone fired from their job. But what's the real problem here? Under capitalism, most workers, at least non-unionized ones, are at-will employees, meaning the boss can fire them for practically anything. You could be fired for having the wrong opinion or just because the boss doesn't like you. If these people really cared about people losing their jobs, why don't they join the struggle against neoliberal austerity in favor of full employment? Besides, how can you guarantee freedom from consequences without violating someone else's freedom of association? If I decide to do something with you, can I not change my mind later if I decide that I don't want to anymore? If I start a sports league and kick out a player for breaking the rules of the game, is that really any different from banning someone from a forum? That brings me to the next redefinition of free speech: entitlement to a platform. This one is seen mostly online on social media and web forums. Someone gets banned or censored for saying something that the mods or admins don't like, and they get all up in arms about how the website isn't about free speech anymore. The problem here is that under capitalism, private enterprises often get so big that people start seeing them as public services. Naomi Klein wrote about this phenomenon years before the rise of social media in her book, No Logo. She described things like mega malls and corporate towns as an example of privatization of the public sphere, turning the town center into the shopping center. Still, the reality is that these websites are private operations. They're under no obligation to provide a platform for anyone, let alone a no-strings-attached platform allowing a few users to alienate the rest through abusive behavior. How can believers in the free market and private enterprise complain about this? What do they want instead?
There seems to be a very clear trend. My verification check was taken away for making jokes about the wrong group of people. Conservative commentators and journalists are being punished, being suspended, having their tweets deleted by Twitter. Facebook is, removing criticism of immigration in Europe. Are there any mechanisms that the government can use to remind these companies that they have that responsibility, or do we just have to trust that the market's going to punish them if they don't?
I'm not sure exactly what sort of government policy decision could have any influence on that.
What did you expect him to say, Milo? Do you even know what you're asking for? Another thing people seem to mean when they cry free speech is freedom from criticism. This should be obvious, but when someone criticizes you, they're not infringing on your freedom of speech, they're just using their own. People call leftists oversensitive a lot, but it seems that people on the right often feel deeply persecuted and offended whenever someone calls them a bigot. People even cry freedom of speech over things that are completely unrelated, like trigger warnings. I know they've become a meme nowadays from overuse, but how are they any different from spoiler warnings or not safe for work? And even if someone is being persecuted for what they say by the state, it doesn't always necessarily mean that it's some disturbing slip towards totalitarianism. If you want to avoid making a slippery slope fallacy, you have to show why the slope is slippery. Reducing everything down to that's censorship and censorship is bad ignores the fact that speech has consequences. And sometimes those consequences are worse than censorship.
My verification check was taken away for making jokes about the wrong group of people.